Richplanet TV is sponsored by shopholistic.co.uk, bringing you quality detox and natural health products at affordable prices.
Welcome back. I'm Richard D. Hall and I'm talking to John Hanson about his series of books entitled Haunted Skies, and these are encyclopedias charting hundreds of UFO cases from 1940 up to, well, you're up to the mid-1970s, but
yeah,
we're going to discuss a case from Volume 1 which took place in 1947.
That's right, yes.
Okay.
It originally came to us from a lady called Molly Tilley, and
Molly Tilley.
Molly Tilley, yeah.
Right.
The lady that gave it to us is no longer with us, but she introduced us to Molly, and we interviewed Molly, and she told us a fascinating story which had been handed down by her mother, and was a source of occasional conversation in the family about what had happened in 1947. And according to Molly, it took place at a place called Fishpool Hill.
This is near Hereford.
Yeah, which is where we went and had a look at it, and it involved her uncle Frank Hanford. And according to Molly, she said my uncle and mother were not the sort of persons to make up wild stories. They were the exact opposites, not given to flights of imagination. My mother told me this story many times over the years and was adamant Frank was telling the truth. Certainly, Molly didn't go around making stories about aliens and UFOs, but this is what she was told, and according to her mother Betty, Frank and his housekeeper, who lived at this a farm next to an apple orchard where they sold apples to make cider, they were disturbed by dogs barking in the middle of the night. Now, I would just say that we managed to confirm that there was a Mrs. Newman at that address, and Frank, I have no idea what the relationship was, but that's as much as we know. But according to her, and according to what her mother told her, the housekeeper was disturbed by dogs barking in the middle of the night. So, fearing intruders, Frank loaded a pair of shotguns and he went out to see what was going on, because there appeared to be some activity around the apple orchard. And then he said, we saw the incredible sight of a dome-shaped craft glowing with lights descending onto the ground, and they watched as a pair of steps slowly came out of the craft, followed by the entrance of 3 silver-suited beings. These beings stood next to the spaceship, picked up some apples and a piece of turf before re-entering the ship and leaving. And I would say again that if you judge that case on its individual merits as a one-off, you'd probably be you'd be laughing your socks off, because it sounds absolutely ridiculous and unbelievable. But then when you've covered so many hundreds of other cases involving these entities that perform the most apparently stupid of tasks, you perhaps would change your mind. But anyway, the next morning, because then this thing took off, and when they went out the next morning, they discovered a large circular impression burnt into the ground and scorching to a nearby wicket gate. So Frank telephoned the police, and they arrived with men from the Air Ministry as well as military personnel. They conducted a search of the area with a Geiger counter which revealed high levels of radiation, and then they warned Frank of the dire consequences if he told anybody what had happened. We spoke to a guy down there called Andrew Bailey, who did some research into the matter on our behalf, and he as I say, ascertained that the farmhouse was demolished in 48, and of course the electoral rolls gave those names prior to that date. So it was an interesting case. Again, the only evidence we've got is the word of Molly Tilley, who's probably passed away by now. But Molly was adamant that's what her mum told her, and her mum got that from somebody. And I mean, there was no embellishment to it. That's the great thing about these stories, if you like, if you can call them stories or reports. If somebody was going to embellish them, they would embellish them, but there's no embellishment. It is a familiar pattern of events. I mean, a few weeks ago, you met Kevin Goodman here today, and Kevin put us in a touch with a guy called Lance, whose story is covered in volume 6, I think. But Lance, 77, Lance and the rest of his family saw a saucer-shaped object hovering over the garden, and the next morning it left a burnt ring into the brickwork, as well as the grass. And the family were told, had a visit and were told not to tell anybody. And he always promised his mum he wouldn't tell anybody what had happened till his mother passed away. And his mother passed away last year. And unfortunately, Lance Caldwell, that was his name, Lance has still agreed for us to go and see him and interview him, despite the fact that a few months ago his son, Lewis, passed away from cancer, aged 10. And I just think it's important, because when I say it's important, I just think that, you know, these are people's personal lives, and we were quite touched when Lance said to us that his son, before he died, wanted to see a Doctor Who performance, and they took him there, and he met all the people on the stage. So it's quite emotional. But dealing with people sometimes can be emotional, as you know. Yeah. And I just think that was a lovely story.
So they took apples and a piece of turf.
Apples and a turf. And we're quite often, so many reports of these beings, because they're certainly not humans. Some people call them humanoids, but they appear to be doing something to the ground, or measuring it, or recovering pieces of turf or grass or apples or anything. For what reason, I really don't know.
Right. But they're obviously interested in the Earth's biology, ecosystem, what have you.
Maybe they're testing it, or doing something with it. You see, none of this makes sense to me. We said as a police officer, without having got into this at all, I would have thought people, if you like us, I would have regarded them as crackpots. But having learnt from so many people what they've experienced, there certainly is a truth behind all of this.
If you take the analogy that it doesn't make any sense. If you just look at David Attenborough, when he goes and studies, and I've said this in the past before, he goes to study a group of gorillas. What's one thing that he makes sure of is that he tries to hide as much as he can. Yeah. Initially, you know, he won't present himself to them because he doesn't want to affect their behaviour. As soon as he presents himself in their world with a camera that they've never seen before, it then massively affects their behaviour, which is the same with us. If something alien presents itself to you, it affects your behaviour. David Attenborough wants to look at their behaviour, so he hides behind a rock and does it that way, and will take samples or take images, and we'll do things covertly. So, but because that's clearly assuming all of these volumes are genuine reports, and I'm sure a lot of them are, they clearly have a wish to remain covert. Would you go along with that, John? At least on a large scale. They're not...
Well,
they're not.
You're right. They certainly don't make their presence known to us, to the majority of us. I mean, one lady wrote to me years ago, and she said, well, John, she said, what's to stop them all coming through? And you're right, I don't know what the answer to that is, but they are there, they exist, and occasionally people do see. I mean, there's so many cases. A police officer from Devon and Cornwall contacted me last year. His case is in 1968, where a lorry driver on the way into Credit and Devon stopped at the side of the crossroads, which is actually, we went up there with the retired police sergeant, and managed to get hold of the police report, because this police officer had still got the report from 68, and from the lorry driver, and the lorry driver saw a saucer-shaped object in a field with figures dancing around it. And he saw that, and he was terrified, and he went to Crediton police station and made a statement, and we managed to get hold of a statement, and then after a lot of problems, a photograph of the man himself, because it's important. When we first started this, we didn't bother with photographs. We thought, well, but this is photographs of people.
Of witnesses.
Yeah, it's important. You couldn't do it all because then you'd end up with about 500 volumes. But where cases of extreme importance, such as Nigel Frappel and James Saladin, we need their photos, because what we're doing here now, hopefully people can look at in 40 or 50 years' time. And I mean, you yourself are playing your own part in this, because you're preserving the social history of all of this. Because if you don't do it and I don't do it, what do we end up with?
Yeah,
we end up with nothing.
I'm very much dipping into it and trying to represent it through the televisual medium, whereas you're doing it through volumes of encyclopedias. So it's a different task, it's a different objective, but your information is far more comprehensive, and you've just got to look at the books to see that. But as we mentioned earlier, it needs to be done, but you're never ever going to get any proper academic type funding for this kind of work.
Not at all. We also mentioned earlier that if anybody's interested in doing some illustrations for us, that would be fine. David Sankey was golden. He's helped us out. It's some years ago, for many years, but Dave has moved on in the same way that others, we mentioned their names before this morning. Dave helped us, but then moved on, mainly because we can't afford to pay them, because we're not making money out of these. People seem to think I've had a couple of emails from people that have tried to scrounge money off me because I think we're making millions. We've actually lost thousands.
Because you've written a book, you
well, 6
you must
books,
have money.
Well, that's right, but it's not about making money. It's about getting this across so that future generations can make up their own mind. That's all I ask. People read the books, make up their own minds. I mean, that's what it's about.
All right, John, well, thanks for speaking to me again, and in next week's show we're going to talk about some more cases. This time we're coming more up to date into the late 60s. Up to date, late 60s and early 70s. Because I think the 60s book, or the third volume, it only covers 2 years.
It does, indeed.
66 to 67.
Yeah.
So is that presumably that they were...
There was a lot of activity in 67.
Right. All right, John, well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
Richplanet TV is sponsored by shopholistic.co.uk, bringing you quality detox and natural health products at affordable prices.